In 2019, one of my favorite YouTube channels, Snazzy Labs, made a video about what it was like to game using the 2019 Mac Pro. But it's 2022, so things have changed a bit. Mostly that we have more GPU options, such as the budget 6600 XT or the highest end we can currently stick in a Mac Pro, we'll talk about that more in a minute, with the 6900 XT. And there's a little bit of caveats about installing and using each of these GPUs. Not many though. And then we're going to compare these to Mac versus Windows 10 in the same computer, and we're also going to throw in the M1 Pro and the M1 Max for good measure to compare performance and see how good we can do. You could be anywhere in the world and you're rocking with me. I want you to know I appreciate that. And I think we can bring this intro to a close. As always, check the description of this video as there's important links there and any updates. If you happen to browse eBay, the 2019 Mac Pros are a great buy, but they're now in the realm of reality with $3,000 to $4,000 for the low-end configurations. It's tough to say if these are a good or bad buy, but I'd probably lean more towards the later because Apple brutalized the Mac lineup and ended up killing support for quite a few Intel Macs in their latest macOS 13 release. Because of this, I recently went on a planned obsolescence rant in my last video, and it was surprisingly well received. If you're curious, you can check out that video. I'd rather keep this video much more focused. The reason why I now think it's time to make a video about the 2019 Mac Pros in gaming is two main reasons. First, and number one, is macOS added support for Big Navi 21 GPUs quite some time ago, meaning you can pick up anything from a 6600 XT, 6800, 6800 XT, and a 6900 XT and stick it in your Mac. Second, and more important, the GPU crisis actually ended. You can buy a GPU. Well, you could before, but not below MSRP. This means it's no longer a poor life decision to get a new GPU for your Mac. Apple does sell its own MPX AMD GPUs, but they're horrendously bad buys. The big advantage of the MPX GPUs is they add Thunderbolt 3 ports and support video pass-through to the Thunderbolt 3 ports already found on your Mac Pro, and they do not require additional power cables. For viewers who haven't seen a MPX slot in person, it's a PCIe slot that also happens to have more pinouts for additional data like Thunderbolt 3 and also power delivery. And yes, they work as regular PCIe slots. For 99% of users, I assume this is not worth the 6x price increase for the 6900 XT. You can buy an entire Mac Studio Ultra for the price of the Radeon Pro W6900X MPX module. Seriously, Apple, what the hell? Alright, I said no rants. As of recording this video, Apple's yet to officially support the 6850 and the 6950 GPUs. But it is possible to use OpenCore and simply spoof the GPU ID so that macOS will use the drivers to support these GPUs. This is possible since these GPUs are essentially Big Navi 21 chipsets with higher clock speeds. If you notice, up until this point, I have not mentioned the 6700 XT, and that's because it's a different Navi chipset, the Navi 22, and is currently not supported in macOS. Check the description of this video as it might change, and if it does, I'll make a note of it there. For this video, I have the XFX SWFT210, which is the 6600 XT, the 6900 XT Gaming OC edition by Gigabyte, the almighty M1 Pro, which is the 16-inch version, and the M1 Max, the 24-inch version. Installing the GPU on the Mac Pro 2019 is pretty easy, except for you have to unplug everything, which is pretty awful design in what could have been otherwise the best tower Apple has ever designed. Yeah, better than the folding door G3s and G4s. While you might have mixed feelings about the exterior, inside is a work of art. Unlock the PCIe cards, unscrew the PCIe lock, then seat the card and alright. So this is one of the more awful things about the 2019 Mac Pro, and it's that it uses custom PCIe cables. Belkin sells the only set that I'm aware of, and it's not cheap. You're going to pay $70 for them, but at least you'll end up with a lot and you'll never need to buy more power cables as it comes with pretty much all of them. As you can see here, this takes 3 8-pin power connectors to connect in this GPU. This 6900 XT is a beast. While editing this video, I noticed OWC makes these. They're cheaper. Apple, for all its supposed industrial design chops, can't stop from parodying itself. It's completely bonkers that it doesn't use standard goddamn power cables. Hell, it even has one of them. See, right there. In a much more perfect world, I'd be hired as an Apple consultant, and my job would be to carry around a squirt gun and spray Apple employees as they suggested user-hostile moves. Damn it, I said no rants. Let's get serious. So beyond the caveats of having to unplug everything, just open the case, and the custom cables, there's one last gotcha for installing a GPU. You need to have a graphics card that can fit. GPUs now are longbois, and the Mac Pro 2019 can only house a card that is under 305mm long. Some of the latest graphics cards are much longer than that, so you'll need to be aware when selecting a GPU. Of course, modern NVIDIA GPUs are not supported in macOS. You can use an NVIDIA RTX series in Windows or Linux, but really the entire point of owning a Mac Pro 2019 is that it can boot macOS, so I won't be discussing NVIDIA hardware. I did stick a GeForce 760 for science in my Mac Pro 2019 and made a video about it, so you can check that out. So to summarize the hardware requirements, the Mac Pro 2019 requires the following: custom power cables for aftermarket GPUs. GPUs must be under 305mm. OpenCore, as of recording this video, is required to run the 6x50 GPUs, and the 6700 XT is currently not supported. This could always change. Modern NVIDIA GPUs are not supported in macOS, but can be used in Windows or Linux. Now let's talk about software and performance. As everyone knows, Mac gaming sucks. Apple's perpetual changes like switching architectures multiple times, removing OpenGL from macOS, dropping 32-bit support, and so forth has meant the Mac can never build up much of a game library. There was a time when Madden, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, Halo, and such all made it to the Mac, but that time was a long time ago. Since Apple uses Metal, its own graphics API, and unlike Windows that allows for multiple graphics APIs to exist, this further kicks Mac gaming in the teeth. For example, the Dolphin emulator uses a Vulkan to Metal translation layer for macOS and thus does not perform as well as its Windows counterpart. Even when a very good port of a game exists like Rise of the Tomb Raider, it does not run as well as its Windows counterpart. Which brings me to the first set of benchmarks. My Mac Pro configuration is pretty modest. It has a 8-core 3.5 GHz W3223, and it has 64 gigs of RAM, and it boots off NVMe. Here we have the 6600 XT Mac versus Windows in 1080p and 4K at the highest quality setting. Unsurprisingly, macOS is an underperformer, although it does do an admirable job at 4K, as it doesn't seem Mac has much of a hit here. Next we have the 6900 XT Mac versus Windows in 1080p and 4K. Again, the story is the same. 4K is close, but as you scale down in resolution, it's clear that Windows is a lot more efficient. An interesting footnote, my macOS 12 install is totally fresh and new, and my Windows 10 install is old and it's just a bit janky. Next we have the same set of data, but this time I've tossed in the M1 Pro 16-core GPU and the M1 Max 24-core GPU versus the 2019 Mac Pro and 1080p with the 6600 XT and 6900 XT and in 4K. Unsurprisingly, the Mac Pro clearly bests the upper tier of Apple Silicon, and this shouldn't be a surprise. As good as the Tomb Raider port is, it's still not Apple Silicon native, but even then, it would get steamrolled as the CPU is not the weak link here. To be fair, the 6600 XT consumes more power than the entire MacBook Pro M1 Max. Much of the Apple Silicon magic is the media engine, which doesn't really apply to games at all. It should be quite obvious that macOS is not the ideal way to game. Windows is. Unlike Apple Silicon, the Mac Pro 2019 can boot Windows natively, which is a huge advantage over the Apple Silicon. Perhaps one day, Microsoft will bring Windows to these Macs, but until then, it's only virtual machines and crossover, which doesn't work that well. I'm not going to get into the whole install process, but the best way to run Windows on your Mac Pro 2019 is to have a dedicated SSD, preferably an NVMe SSD, and skip using the Boot Camp Assistant. After Windows has finished installing, you can then install the Boot Camp Assistant drivers. Booting Windows on a Mac Pro 2019 is simple as changing your startup disk or holding down the Option key at boot. Out of the box, Windows detected my GPU but used a screwball driver, and the AMD installer would not detect my GPU. I could play most games, but if they required a certain version number on the driver, it wouldn't work. It turned out I needed to pull my old RX 5800 from my Mac Pro. Once that was out of the way, I was able to install the full driver set and pull the games from my Steam library. Downloading games using Gigabit FiOS is always a fun CPU stress test. Most people are unaware of the CPU hits downloads can have. I recall seeing another YouTuber, I think it was LTT, fully saturate a 16-core CPU using 10 gig eNet just by downloading Steam titles. Since I'm running the weak sauce W3223, I'm hitting about 70% CPU usage. Nothing strange there and in line with what I'd expect. With the 6900 XT, 4K at 60Hz gaming is very much a reality. Virtually every game I tossed at it ran fantastically, although trying to capture and play games had a frame rate hit. Cyberpunk 2077 wasn't super thrilled to be captured. Red Dead Redemption 2 is a game known for its large open world vistas and hammering PCs. Quite frankly, I'm impressed the 6600 XT was even able to hit 33 frames per second.
God damn it!
Far Cry 6 was particularly a favorite of mine. Being stuck on AMD hardware means skipping out on advanced ray tracing features, but damn if the game doesn't run buttery smooth. Far Cry comes with a nice benchmark, so here's the 6600 XT versus the 6900 XT. The 6600 XT at 1080p is very solid, but it's just not a 4K gaming card. The 6900 XT, on the other hand, is a 4K beast. To make this more interesting, I'm going to pull in some benchmarks other people have performed, so credit to them, because I don't have a gaming PC. This first data point is from Tom's Hardware and their test bench. They use a Intel Core i9 9900K with DDR4 3600. Our next data point is from TechSpot. They use a Ryzen 9 5950X with DDR 4300. Oh, and for my Mac users, the Ryzen system's the better of the two, complete with PCI 4.0. It would generally be considered a very high-end or high-end gaming PC. For fun, we'll throw in a third data point, this time from the FPS review. This system's using the famed Intel Core i9, the 12900K. This is that CPU that bested the M1 in performance, especially in single core. To be fair to this system, it's using an NVIDIA GPU, and that matters for Far Cry as it performs better on AMD GPUs. The Mac Pro 2019 holds its own, and that's pretty impressive because it's not a gaming computer. Actually, I think I'm going to rephrase that. The Mac Pro 2019 is a very capable gaming machine, even though it wasn't intended to be one. The Mac Pro 2019 doesn't do as well in 1080p gaming, and that's not a surprise as it's CPU bound, and it has the weakest CPU out of this group. It's the only 8-core other than the i9 9900K, the AMD CPU has 16 physical cores, and so does the 12900K, although that one has a split between 8 efficiency cores and 8 performance cores, much like Apple Silicon does in other ARM CPUs. Here's one more set of benchmarks, this time using Middle-earth Shadow of War. Again, the story's the same, the 6600 XT is not the 6900 XT.
No more tasting boot heel for me.
I know many people aren't huge fans of 3D Mark, but I caught it on a Steam sale, so I'm gonna run it. The Mac Pro 2019 with the 6900 XT seems to do well, landing in the 89th percentile. The percentile strikes me as a bit meaningless, as I have no idea what's above it or below it. Also, I'm not sure if it's skewed because there's a whole fleet of dudes who just seem to really like running benchmarks and tune their entire systems for that. Again, I'm going to use Tom's Hardware as my reference point. This particular GPU or unit scores 19,430. Now here it is compared against Tom's Hardware's findings. This card is not very overclocked. If you look at Gigabyte's page, it's overclocked by about 2%. Seriously, they've only been overclocked 35 MHz. I'd expect only a 2% increase, but we're seeing 5% increase. It's not that much. The other 2.5% probably is just driver optimization. Next, we can use the full system performance provided by Guru 3D. Again, the CPU is the weak link. I'd be fascinated to see how the other Xeons perform as they trade clock speed for core count. Moving on, Windows brings a whole world of emulation. Switch games run, quite frankly, amazing, although recording it seemed to cause the frame rate hit. Here's Breath of the Wild at 4K and Yuzu, and damn if it does not look sharp. PlayStation 3 emulation works very well, although it's really dependent on a game-by-game basis. Red Dead Redemption runs a bit messy. The Mac finally has decent PlayStation 2 emulators. I don't know what to say other than these just run better under Windows, and here I am playing SSX3 in 4K. I've focused more on the 6900 XT because it's likely if you can afford a 2019 Mac Pro, you probably can afford a 6800 XT or 6900 XT. The 6600 XT is roughly the performance of a GeForce 1060. I can already hear the comments section complaining. I know I shouldn't use these sites, but they do give us a sense of where the 6600 XT lands. In the AMD space, it's very close to the 5700 XT. At the very least, the 6600 XT should be the lowest tier GPU anyone runs in a Mac Pro 2019, as these are really affordable. I picked up one for $330, but I'm guessing these will start falling in price. The 6600 XT can use AMD's Fidelity FX Super Resolution ML Upscaling. For those not familiar, this uses machine learning to help upscale the image by making it sharper and retaining detail. I am going to assume you already know that a LCD has a fixed resolution. If you output an image that's not that native resolution, it'll have to be upscaled and it'll look blurrier. ML upscaling isn't a magic bullet, but it sure looks better. You can upscale a 1080p image to 4K and it'll look better-ish. Of course, using a resolution closer to the native resolution will give you better results, like using 1440p to go to 2160p or 4K. You'll need a high-resolution display to really see the results here, but you should get the idea. 1080p on the left, and then we're going all the way up to native 4K on the right. The point here is that it takes a lot less work for the GPU to render a lower resolution image and upscale it than it takes to render the image at a higher resolution. 4K or 2160p is literally 4 times as many pixels as 1080p. Before we close out this video, let's talk about should you get a Mac Pro 2019. The Mac Pro 2019 does exceptionally well at gaming. Buying one strictly for gaming, though, probably is irresponsible, and it's really hard if you're a professional to go for one over the Mac Studio. Those are wicked fast. However, the Mac Pro 7,1, the 2019, is probably going to be the best x86 Mac ever produced, and there are legit use cases for the 2019. For fun, bringing up the Geekbench metal benchmarks that Macworld produce, my 6900 XT gaming OC is nearly twice as fast as the M1 Ultra, and I didn't even try and overclock it further. I find it disappointing that a $5,000 computer like the Mac Studio does not include a better GPU. Compared against other $5,000 computers, it's not that much faster than a 12900K. I don't want to over-criticize the Mac Studio as the thermals are nuts on this thing, but it's not the computer that most of us want. The Mac Pro 2019 seems destined to be the only real way to play serious games using an Apple-made computer until something radically changes. Sadly, Mac gaming will continue to suck, and playing games on Apple-made computers moving forward doesn't look so good. My YouTube channel is not gaming focused, but it is Mac focused. So I've done a few videos on emulation, which covers some gaming, and I want to do a follow-up video on gaming options under macOS at some point in the future. So keep an eye out for that one. I think for most people though, a PlayStation 5 is the way to go, if you can find one, or an Xbox, whatever. So to summarize, there are games on macOS, but gaming is primarily a Windows activity. The Mac Pro 2019 hangs with high-end gaming PCs. If for some reason you do pick up a Mac Pro 2019, then this thing games pretty damn well and will continue to do so for quite some time into the future. We do not know how long Apple intends to support Intel. Hopefully it's for several more years, but it's anyone's guess. Until we know what Apple intends to do with the Apple Silicon Mac Pro, the Mac Pro 2019 remains Apple's best designed desktop since, well, the original classic Mac Pros. I want you to check out the description of this video because I have all the links to all the sources I use. Yes, I know it's not ideal, and I put some of my thoughts on what I did in this video and what I could have done better. I don't want to drag down the video with all that, so just see the description. I'm probably aware of some of your complaints. Also, I want to say thanks for watching. My name's Greg. I'm going to crack another cold one because it is suddenly got hot in the Pacific Northwest. We've had perpetual winter and now it's hot. So, there you go.
And this is how the story begins. I used to write my raps on the backs of scraps of paper napkins. Buried beneath my small town roots, I latched on the truth, acting up as a youth. My ass